This is the Week in Sustainability from Sustain.Life. It's where our team of sustainability experts and practitioners share commentary to keep you up to date on developing stories and news.
Hello, and welcome back to the Week in Sustainability. I'm Hannah Nosofsky, a member of our sustainability team at Sustain.Life. Today, I'm joined by Arcadia Lee. Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. I'm Arcadia Lee. I'm a senior sustainability consultant at Sustain.Life, and I've spent about the last 5 years now helping businesses, nonprofits, and even governments try to find ways to reduce their environmental footprint. I actually started my career working in the environmental conservation area. And while that is an area that will always be close to my heart, I really enjoy helping organizations translate sustainability into actionable strategies. So yeah, with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Hannah. Nice to be here.
Thanks. I'm so glad you're here. We have three stories this week. So, Topo Finance published some new findings on the size and impact of financed emissions. And then MIT's Sloan School of Management also published new research confirming what I think we already knew about the importance of third party assurance. And then finally, we can't not talk about Monday's solar eclipse and the emissions implications there. So, starting off with Topo Finance's second edition of the Carbon Bankroll, which they released right at the end of March. The essence of this report is non financial companies are unknowingly letting their cash fund carbon intense industry. So, financed emissions or category 15 of scope 3, we most often talk about it in relation to investors and financial service providers. But this report's central thesis is that large companies have investments and they're leaving a lot of reduction on the table when they overlook those investments.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, Hannah. And I'll just add in here that while tracking those scope 3 emissions can seem pretty complex because of all of the stakeholder engagement with external parties that's needed, it's becoming increasingly important for companies to try to take that responsibility over their entire footprint.
Yeah. And who's paying attention to companies that are assessing their investments?
But yeah, so some of the big sort of entities that are paying attention to this category and definitely want to try to report on those emissions are investors and financial institutions, but also companies and really pretty much any organization that's interested in sustainable finance or developing more responsible investment practices should absolutely consider trying to account for those emissions from category 15.
Mhm. And when you're having conversations with companies and they're looking into their financed emissions, where do rating institutions like MSCI or FTE Russell, like how do they find themselves in the conversation?
Yeah, so we've actually been approached by companies who are seeking to get rated from some of those index providers that you just mentioned, like MSCI and FTSE Russell, because, for a myriad of different reasons, usually companies do this to try to attract ESG investors, improve brand reputation, improve stakeholder engagement practices, or improve other areas of ESG practices as well. But yeah, those things come up pretty commonly with companies, especially as their competitors look to get rated. It sort of starts this like gamification of, who can get a better score for all of the reasons that I just mentioned. I think one of the other things to call out here is that there's been this nascent shift towards climate impact investing, where we've seen this trend towards investing basically in different climate technologies, where the central focus is on reducing exposure to carbon emissions, and basically trying to seize an opportunity to try and transition the economy towards a low carbon one. But basically, ESG evaluates a broader set of criteria. Whereas this shift towards climate impact investment specifically targets climate related outcomes. But really, both of these approaches, ESG investing and climate impact investing, they both play a really important role in trying to align your capital with responsible and sustainable practices.
Yeah. The recommendations that they set forth in this report made a lot of sense to me. And the biggest one was mostly a mindset change around category 15 of scope 3. We are already used to engaging our suppliers with categories like purchase goods and services and upstream and downstream transportation and distribution. And their recommendation was to think about your bank like any other supplier, just as you would meet with your procurement professionals to discuss shifting to more sustainable products. Companies should be encouraged to meet with their treasury team and encourage and or empower and educate them to add a sustainability lens to their cash management. So also, like supplier engagement, conversations with your bank might not immediately yield data transparency, but expressing interest, having these conversations, especially if you're a big player in the space, gets a ball rolling in the right direction. And in the same vein, data transparency is becoming more important across the board. MIT Sloan School of Management published results on research using Clarity AI that reveals that companies without external assurance might not be making the reductions that they think they are. So this analysis included more than 30,000 listed companies and leveraged Clarity AI and machine learning modules to bring in all of their emissions data. The conclusion was companies that are getting assured are decreasing their emissions by 7.5% year over year and carbon intensity by 3.3% year over year. So I guess the question is like what is driving seeking external assurance right now?
Yeah, reporting is one of the primary drivers that I can think of at this point. There's assurance that will be needed for CSRD as well as for large aggregators, specifically when it comes to SEC compliance. For SEC, that limited assurance requirement won't be required until 2029, with that transitioning to reasonable assurance in 2033, which might seem like far away for a lot of companies. But I think that those years will definitely come a lot sooner than we realize, especially if, you're just starting off with your carbon footprinting and you still have a long way to try and make it as accurate as possible and implement a data improvement plan. The other group that this is really important for is for investors and stakeholders as well, because they really want to make sure that companies have done their best to accurately and completely capture their emissions. So companies that verify their emissions, they really demonstrate a significant and economically meaningful decline in their absolute emissions and carbon intensity over time. And all of that, can be done through limited and reasonable insurance. So it's really important. It sort of sets the stake in the ground, so to speak, for companies and proves to their stakeholders that what they're reporting is accurate, essentially.
Okay. And then jumping over to Monday's eclipse. So on Monday, North America saw their second solar eclipse in 7 years. And there are obviously the emissions to be discussed. The estimate is over 50 Super Bowls worth of people got in cars, maybe in planes to the path of totality. Absolutely, there are emission sources to be discussed there, but the impact on the grid is what we're gonna talk about now. I mean, the sun goes behind the moon, and we don't generate any solar power. So how did grid operators prepare for that?
Yeah, yeah, really exciting stuff. Super cool. I don't know if you got a chance to see it, but here in New Hampshire, it was a pretty awesome spectacle. But back in 2017, solar generation and wind generation actually dropped by about 25%, which actually pushed many of our grid operators to try to increase that reliance on fossil fuels like natural gas and coal power. So those things really came into play in a strong way when it came to trying to balance our energy grid system during the eclipse.
Yeah. And thankfully, we have a flexible enough and diversified energy system, so nobody's power was cut short on Monday. But we would like to see solar energy take a larger part in the grid year over year. And it's important for system operators to know how to be flexible to those circumstances. They already do know how to do that. Very cloudy days force the same kinds of adjustments that the solar eclipse does. Um, so it's just really awesome to watch them react to that.
Totally. Yeah. And actually, what we saw this year, just this past Monday, was a 71% peak power reduction in the east, a 45% reduction in the west, and 93%. That's huge. And on the Texas grid. So this really just highlights and emphasizes the importance of having more renewable on-demand generation, like pumped hydro and battery storage, things that can be called on in a matter of seconds or minutes to try and balance our energy grid. But other more emerging technologies like green hydrogen are going to become even more important in reducing our power sector carbon emissions.
Texas is such an interesting case there because they have a really high percentage of solar generation on their grid and prioritizing a lot of battery build, or they're building a lot of batteries at the same time that they're completely encouraging, like, keeping coal industry in Texas.
So another thing that I wanted to talk about today, Hannah, because I think it would be really remiss if we didn't. But basically, the latest SBTI development when it comes to environmental attribute certificates, otherwise known as EACs. But basically, the SBTI is looking to expand the use of EACs, which actually means companies will soon be able to use them more specifically when it comes to their scope 3 reductions and reporting to try and tackle some of those more indirect areas. Can be things coming from their suppliers and things like that. But basically, it'll offer more flexibility for businesses who are on the path to net zero. And while the official rules and details on how to use them hasn't been released yet, that'll happen in July. It's just something that we should all be aware of that's happening because it's really exciting to see how things are going to develop. But
We talk a lot about how this space is changing constantly, and this is a huge shift away from SBTI's previous hardline against applying EACs for abatement. I'm really excited to see what rules are going to come out in July. And those are our stories this week. So thank you, Arcadia, so much for joining, and thank you everyone for watching.
Sustain.Life is the leading and most comprehensive sustainability software on the market. To learn how we can help your company measure its emissions and take climate action, go to Sustain.Life. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this show on our YouTube channel or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week.